Good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to see so many of you here this morning, as well as the Master Gardeners that are joining us via Zoom. Good morning. Before I introduce our esteemed speaker, I'd like to welcome Chris Williams, the Video Production Administrator, and his team, Emma and John, from the James City County Community Video Center. They are recording the educational segment of our meeting. As many of you know, we've been working to improve the quality of our video and our sound, particularly when esteemed speakers like Dr. Fox are joining us and making themselves available to share their expertise with the association. So we appreciate you, Chris, John, Emma, thank you so much for being here. And I will make the link to the video available to the membership as soon as it's ready. So, with that said, our speaker today is Dr. Laurie Fox. She is the Horticulture Associate with Statewide Research and Extension Responsibilities with Virginia Tech Hampton Roads Agricultural Research and Extension Center, AREC. She earned her PhD in horticulture from Wageningen University, the Netherlands, her Bachelor of Science and Master of Science in Horticulture from North Carolina State University with a focus in landscape design, ornamental plant production, and weed science. Prior to her current position, Dr. Fox was a North Carolina Cooperative Extension Service Community Agent for 3 years and a weed scientist for a year with AREC. In her current role of Horticulture Associate, she works in the areas of water quality and sustainable landscapes. She is also the AREC Tour Coordinator and oversees 29 AREC public demonstration gardens. Dr. Fox is an author and the publisher of the book, Best Plants for Hampton Roads, a Landscape and Garden Companion, is a contributor to the Native Plants for Southeast Virginia Guide, which includes Hampton Roads, a former coordinator of the Virginia Flower and Garden Expo, and an advisor to Tidewater Community College. This morning, we have the pleasure to learn from Dr. Fox on the topic of nutrient management in the landscape. So please join me in welcoming an old friend, Dr. Laurie Fox.
Thank you very much. As always, it's a pleasure to be here with you today and have a topic that I think all of us are interested in at some point in time. I'm pretty casual about things, so if you have questions along the way, feel free, or comments. And then anybody, I guess, that's online can put questions in a chat or something. Is that how we answer their questions? Okay, all right, we can ask questions in. All right, so nutrient management in the landscape. So the question is, where do you start? You kind of have to be a detective, and I liken it to putting together a puzzle. You have to find the different pieces, you have to put them together in an organized pattern to create that bigger vision. And I think the first pieces that you need are the management areas. So which different areas of a landscape are you dealing with, and what are the goals and expectations for those areas? How many of y'all remember back to your landscape design chapter in your intern training? Oh, okay. Okay, is that better? Okay. Technical stuff is great when it works, right? Can't hear me in the back. Is that better? Take a step back. Is that better? Okay. So in that chapter, it talks about different areas of your landscape. You have public areas, private areas, service areas, and they're used for different activities. And so because of that, you would also have different expectations for the management goals in those areas, and then that would impact your nutrients. So Obviously, the public area is the public facing, what's highly visible, and you don't want to be, the ugliest yard on the block. So that requires the highest maintenance, and chances are that means it's going to require the highest nutrient input to maintain your plants. And then public is, again, what everybody sees the most, or you see as you come and go from the home. And then private is generally the back area that for private activities, family activities, pet areas, things like that. Maybe a moderate level of maintenance and management goals. And then you have service areas where you store all the compost bins. And how many of y'all suffer from CHAD, compulsive horticultural acquisition disorder? You got to have a place to put all those plants, that you fall in love with and buy on the spur of the moment and then bring home and go, ooh, now I got to figure out where to plant them. That's your service area. And that probably is the lowest maintenance level that you're dealing with relative to maintaining plants and any kind of nutrient inputs. So once you identify your management areas and the goals and expectations, and this you have to be brutally honest with yourself about this now. But, is this what you're going for? Because this is a very different expectation and management level than, say, this type of a landscape, okay? Or this type, which is a more naturalized native plant support pollinators and wildlife type of a thing. So all of them are very common, though, in our landscapes, and you can have multiple spaces with multiple looks and management levels and expectations. And then you throw into the mix the fact that there are so very many ornamental plants out there, and each one may be just a little bit different in its preferences. So again, all the different pieces that you have to put together. So part of it is the landscape itself and the management area and expectations. Then you've got the plants themselves. What's there already, or what do you thinking about in putting in? And which plants? So where are they in which management areas? And then what condition are they in? Because some plants that are stressed or maybe newly planted might need a little bit more attention relative to nutrients. And of course, we know our annuals, biennials, and perennials. In a landscape, your annuals and your turf grass are the most needy relative to the nutrients that you supply. And annuals they get changed out twice a year, so they're more labor intensive, but you want them to be very ornamental and functional. That's why you put them in. And so from the nutrient standpoint, they require more. And the same with your lawn. You want a very lush, healthy, dense lawn that looks really good. So what plants are there? And then you've got the woody category. So most of your perennials tend to be herbaceous. Your woody plants, of course, your shrubs and your trees. And that's two different categories, your perennials and annuals, and then your woodies. But then within the woodies, you have deciduous and evergreens. And again, these broad categories that require different types of management. And then you can break it down into, if you want to get even more specific, your family, genus, species, cultivars, and varieties. And that's important because, again, in some cases, there are distinct preferences for nutrients for some of these plants. And some of you may have seen the picture before, but I always ask with this picture, what's the problem with these plants? And the answer is nothing. This is what they're supposed to look like. This is what they're supposed to do. And you need to know that about your plants. What are they supposed to do? So that then you can understand if there is a problem like a nutrient deficiency or something like that. And then again, where are they? In a public area, you're going to need more nutrients because you're expecting the plants to perform at a higher level. Anywhere that's highly visible, again, this happens to be a shot of some planters in, I think it's downtown Norfolk. So anything that's a public, highly visible area, anything that's in containers is going to require more nutrients because in containers you water more frequently. So that tends to deplete the nutrients in the soil. Are these plants in beds? That's important because are you treating an individual plant or are you treating an entire bed? If you're planting an entire bed of pansies, for instance, you got 150 pansy plants or more, you're not treating each individual plant, you're treating an entire bed. to make it much more easier. And then again, turf areas, they have their own nutrient requirements, but then in residential situations, you often have one space that is occupied by turf as well as the roots of trees or shrubs or adjacent ornamental plants. So sometimes there might be an area where you have multiple plants and you have sort of conflict resolution that you have to practice, you know, who gets what and how much and who do you want to be the happiest. Because if you manage for turf, your other plants might not be so happy and vice versa. And then again, plants that are new or that you are trying to get established quickly, something like maybe city street trees or something like that, you need more intense nutrient management and applications to get them going quicker in the landscape. And then what condition are the plants in? Sometimes we can be our own worst enemies. On the left, that's a sycamore tree, and on the right is a Bradford pear tree. So, you know, why would either of these trees be in this shape? The tree on the left, it's a sycamore tree, it's a car dealership. And they have to plant trees per the city ordinances, so many trees per so many parking spots, right? But it's a car dealership, and they don't want any kind of debris being dropped on their shiny new cars that they're trying to sell. So this is how they solve that issue. To say that plant is stressed is an understatement. And then, of course, with the Bradford pear tree, obviously we don't plant, or it's not recommended to plant those in landscapes now. But, you know, the tree already grows in a very distinctive shape. Why would you go in and make that many pruning cuts? Definitely stressing the plant out, making it more susceptible to pest issues. It's in a parking lot area, obviously, so now you've compromised the structural integrity. Not that that doesn't happen at, you know, year 15 or 20 anyway, but you've just created a really difficult situation there for that plant. All right, so soil tests, we all know the value of soil tests. Gives you baseline data. You can't look at a soil and tell what's there, or that it's a healthy soil. You need that lab testing, and that gives you a starting point. And the reason that we do this is because landscape ornamentals require different amounts of nutrients, and there's no point putting something out if you already have sufficient there, because excess nutrients cause problems. Different ornamentals require different timing of applications, and different types of applications on different types of nutrients. And we'll talk about all of these types of things. So again, the soil test, very, very valuable. And how many of you are new master gardeners? Okay, quite a few. Good. Have you had this question yet? How do I interpret my soil tester? There is a VCE pub for that, in case you didn't know. But that is so very, very critical. You know, everybody's on board about doing these, but then when it comes to the interpretation, sometimes we need a little bit of help. But your pH is very important, because that determines the availability of your nutrients as well as your nutrient levels. And then you can also look at things like your cation exchange capacity, meaning the ability of the soil and the nutrients and the roots of the plants to interact successfully. And then you can also look at organic matter. I know on the other side in Virginia Beach and Norfolk, a lot of sand. We can't get enough organic matter. Maybe a little bit different up here. But that's important, because organic matter is good for promoting microorganisms, of course, and nutrient and water holding capacity to help have healthier plants. And again, the sweet spot, 5.5 to about 6.5, where most all of your nutrients are readily available. And again, if you already have them, then the management of the nutrients is, we don't need to add any. That may not be what people want to hear, but it can be very helpful. Because nutrients do have a significant impact on our plants. And the poster child for that would be your hydrangeas, of course. When your pH is higher, aluminum is not so readily available, and you get your pinks. When your pH is lower, aluminum is readily available, and you get your blues. And usually there's somewhere in between where you get the lavenders and the mixed ones. But the nutrients definitely have an impact on our plants. So we need to be good soil stewards, and to do that, we need to understand that the soil is very dynamic. It's always changing. It is one of the most complex systems to study and research because of all the activities going on. But when we understand the soil, then we understand how to better or more accurately make our nutrient recommendations. Because ultimately, if you have good, healthy soil, you have healthy plants, and fewer nutrient applications are needed, which saves time, labor, your budget. So utilize the soil for the health of the plants so that you have less inputs and can just sit back and enjoy. How's that sound? All right, so let's talk about timing and placement of the nutrients, because again, if you can spend money and put stuff out and it can be totally wasted if it's not the right time, or that's more than the plant can take up and utilize at a time. So it can be costly, and it can also be frustrating. So when do you actually add nutrients into a landscape? When it's necessary, and a lot of this is common sense. Again, things that are newly planted, because think about these plants. They're coming out of intense production systems where they are trying to grow them as fast as possible to get them to market, to sell them, to make a profit. And you're going to put them in a landscape and walk away. Okay? That is a harsh transition, or a reality awakening, if you want to. So helping transition these plants into a landscape, meaning weaning them off of this high nutrient production cycle and getting them acclimated to the landscape where they kind of have to fend for themselves. So helping them with that step, that process to get there. So adding at that point. Anything that's stressed. Walking in here, can't help but notice the pruning that's recently been done. Just those plants are stressed, to say the least.
So I have a question.
Uh-huh.
I've always heard when you're newly planted, you don't put a lot of fertilizer because they are stressed, and that would just overstress them even more.
Okay, so the question is, you've heard that when you newly plant them, you don't add fertilizer because that just stresses them more. No, you need to transition them, and so. Right. So an example. Well, let me give a couple of examples of what a situation. So if you're putting bedding plants, say, into a bed, so you might go ahead and put in something like, depending on what your soil test says, 10-10-10, which is a quick release, highly soluble, so that they have some nutrients available immediately. But you might also at the same time apply a controlled release fertilizer or slow release fertilizer that then once the 10-10-10 is utilized, because it's available immediately, the slow release kicks in and carries them for the next 3 to 4 months of the growing season, because it's a slow, steady release over time. And that helps get them over the hump. If you're doing planting trees, for instance, again, controlled release in the planting hole, because you wouldn't treat an entire bed for a tree. And so again, trying to get the roots out, but having that nutrient there available when the roots are getting out and getting established. So yeah, newly planted needs a little help. Under stress, again, whether it's something we've done, like the drastic pruning outside, definitely stressful, and you want some nutrients. It's like taking vitamins when you kind of feel like you might be getting sick. You boost your immune system to try and stay healthy. They have had a tremendous shock to their system. A little bit of nutrients will help with the new growth and get them to fill back in and look nicer, quicker. It'll take a long time, though, for the ones up against the building. That was pretty dramatic. But sometimes if you've got plants that are in a construction, adjacent to a construction zone, sometimes if they've been through a drought or they've had insect or disease pressure, sometimes if they've had storm damage, all of these are stressors. And anytime you can boost their systems with a little bit of fertilizer, that would be a good thing. If you've got mixed plantings, we talked about this. Maybe you've got trees in your lawn that are bordered by shrub or perennial beds. You've got multiple plants within close proximity. How do you manage those situations, and which plants do you manage them for? Or you take the middle of the road to try and make everybody have a little bit, even though nobody's extremely happy. And then when do you fertilize, in the spring or the fall? So spring is the best optimal time when the plants are just starting the new growth, because that's when they need the nutrients the most. Everything is going into new leaves, new shoots, new blooms on the plant. And that's the time that they need them the most. And then, you kind of going up in the spring, and then you plateau growth over the summer, and then you start cycling down in the fall. That's the plant's life cycle. So that's why we tell people don't prune and don't fertilize summer going into the fall, because you're trying to push the plant to do things that are going against its physiological, activities. But I do have fall down here with a question mark because, again, Extension recommends fall, the best time for planting trees and shrubs, right? So if, again, you want to fertilize newly planted plants to help them get established, but you don't want to do it to the point in the fall where you're pushing new growth. What you really want in the fall is, if you're adding nutrients, you're there to support the roots, which will grow and establish over the winter as long as the ground isn't frozen. And so what you might do then is go in at a very, very low, like ultra low rate for the root growth. You're not going in at a higher rate to promote and support the top growth of the plant. Okay. So you have to, again, understand what these puzzle pieces are and fit them into the bigger picture of what you're trying to accomplish. So where do you put the nutrients? Around the trunk of a tree is not where the roots that absorb the water and the nutrients that the plant needs, that's not where they are. Those small feeder roots they're out further from the plant canopy, and this applies to most all plants. It's rare that you would ever put fertilizer right around the crown or the trunk of a plant. You need to put it where the roots are that are going to absorb it and make the most use of it. So with the tree, for instance, it's at the canopy drip line outward. Okay. If you are broadcasting it, like with a rotary spreader doing a large area, it's preferable if you can do that before you put your mulch down. If that's part of what your cycle is, mulching in the spring, try and get the fertilizer down, because then it's the closest to the soil and it's not sitting on the top of the mulch and having to be dissolved and go down through the mulch to get into the root zone. You really want to get it in close proximity to the root zone as possible. Again, you can incorporate it into a bed if you're changing out a whole bed, like I'm sure they're going to do out here when the bulbs stop blooming. They'll change that out for something for the summertime, and maybe incorporate it into the bed at that point. Bigger plants, put it in the planting hole, again, where the roots are and can get to it. If it's a situation where you need like an emergency boost, you can do foliar applications to plants. The most common example of that is tomatoes and blossom end rot, which is a calcium deficiency. And, you can't wait and put lime in the soil because that takes a while to react. Ideally, if you've got blossom end rot, you put lime in the soil in the fall, and then it works all through the fall and winter when the garden is dormant, and then it's ready and the soil is amended for your plants in the spring and summer. But no, you've got tomatoes now and all that effort you put in them. So the most common recommendation for that nutrient deficiency is a foliar application to get those tomatoes through the season to cure sort of the deficiency very, very quickly. And then in some cases, and you guys might be very familiar with this up here in a historic area, you have a lot of historic trees. And when they're under stress, sometimes a fertilizer injection is a way to sort of boost it, get it through that stressful period, where other fertilizer practices may not be so effective. When you're injecting it, it's like an IV, basically, into the trunk of the tree. And you have to weigh the pros and cons of that. It's obviously immediately getting nutrients to help the tree, but you're drilling holes in the trunk of an already stressed plant, so you're creating wounds, opportunities for disease or insect, or additional stress. So again, you have to weigh what your situation is and what would be most appropriate. So we all know, you buy the $5 plant because you got a great deal, but you dig the $50 hole, right? To again, make sure that those roots are getting out as quickly as possible. And so the bottom picture is the most appropriate planting hole. There has been a lot of research done. We know that, again, when plants grow in proximity, there is competition. And so this is an example of tree roots that are growing underneath turf grass and that are growing in a mulched bed area. So you see that they're much denser. There's a lot more of those finer roots that, bring in the water and the nutrients. Because the grass, the roots are generally in the top, 6 to 8 inches. And if you're applying nutrients, they have very dense fibrous root systems and they tend to absorb the nutrients, and very little of them get down below the grass roots into the root zone where the tree roots are growing. That's why a lot of times if you are fertilizing trees that are growing in lawns, they tell you to inject or to use spikes that you drive down below the root zone for the grass so that you can get the nutrients into the lower layers of the soil profile where the roots, tree roots are growing. So general recommendations, and I don't expect you to write this down. That's why you have the presentation. You can go back and look at this. But again, if you don't have specifics at this point and you're doing this for yourself, or you get a question from a client, general recommendations, slow release or controlled release fertilizer is the way to go. And what this means is that you have more 50% or more water insoluble nitrogen. We'll talk more about controlled release in just a minute. There's different products out there. Of course, they're more expensive because they're specialized. But the offset is generally it's a one-time application, and you are then set for the entire growing season. Most controlled release fertilizers last about 3 to 4 months. So you get through the peak growing season with one application, so less labor, less energy and effort, one application. And with a controlled release, it's a slow, even release of nutrients over time, so there's less chance that you would have environmental pollution from it, from an over-application, or that you would get plant damage. Incorporate the fertilizer. Again, get it into that root zone or as close as possible. Use it, fertilizer, when you're establishing plants. Go with a moderate nitrogen level. Depends on what your plant is. Nitrogen tends to promote a lot of green growth. So if your goal is to have a lot of flowers or fruit, you might need to back off on the nitrogen, okay? Because somebody calls me, I fertilized my plant and it's growing just fine, but there's no flowers on it. You've sacrificed the flowers for the green growth, okay? So phosphorus has a question mark because, again, soil tests over the years for Virginia have shown that we have adequate phosphorus in our soils generally, and you might not need to add more. So this was great for the new fertilizer companies, right? They take the phosphorus out and sell you a new and revised product with less nutrients in it for more money, right? Way to go. Marketing. But if you're trying to promote roots, flowers, and fruits, you might look at higher phosphorus or potassium levels in your fertilizers. Generally, the recommendation is for 1 to 4 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet per year. Now, that's a pretty broad range. And again, you have to understand what the site is and what the goals are to narrow down what part of that range that you're looking for. You're going to go with the higher part of the range. Again, if you're establishing, you're going to go with the lower part of the range if your plants are already established and it's more of a maintenance type of a situation. Plants that grow in the shade generally need less fertilizer than plants that are growing in full sun because they aren't photosynthesizing as much, right? And then if you've got sandy soils, you might need more frequent applications because the sandy soils do not tend to hold on to the nutrients like your loams and your clays, so that they tend to wash through and not be available. So these are just general. Let's look at some specific groups of plants and how you might tweak these recommendations. And again, what does the soil test say? What are the species of plants you're dealing with, and what are the management goals for that site? So annuals, again, you change them out twice a year. You expect them to establish quickly, grow, and perform over the season. And so you need, again, to transition them out of that high production cycle. And that's why you might need a quick release like a water soluble. And then at the same time, put that slow release or controlled release to carry them through the season. Because it's much better to have steady, constant release of nutrients than to have a quick release and then it's gone, and then you have to come back and add more and then come back. And it's like a roller coaster ride for the plants. Which if you're on a roller coaster constantly, eventually you're not going to feel so good, right? And again, because a lot of times it's color that you're looking for, especially blooms, look at your higher phosphorus and potassium rates. And usually you're incorporating things into a bed. You know, it's rare that you only plant one annual, right? You want masses of them for the visual impact. With bulbs, the bulbs are a great addition to the landscape, especially if they're ones that come back every year. But generally, you are going to be applying your nutrients when you plant them in the fall. Because again, the roots are growing over the winter to give it that boost that it needs in the spring to shoot up quickly and bloom profusely, right? You can fertilize in the spring if you want to. And do that right after they finish blooming. And that's really to help that bulb, the foliage get the green growth and create all of those reserves that they store in the bulb before the foliage dies down. So that might be beneficial at that point. And again, high phosphorus and potassium, not so much the nitrogen. And then a lot of times with bulbs, they recommend more organic products like bone meal. Yes? Yes, I can hear you just fine. All right, so if you're allowing the plants in your landscape to self-seed, particularly the annuals, is the question, when is the best time to apply the fertilizer? In the spring, when they first start growing, their active growth. You might have to ask yourself, are these winter annuals or summer annuals? But whenever the plants are starting their active growth, that's when they need it the most. Because if they seed and then you put fertilizer down and it's not time for the seeds to germinate and grow, fertilizer's not doing you any good. All right, so perennial plants. Again, for roots and flowers, back off on the nitrogen. Early spring as they start their new growth, but you have to be really careful, especially with perennials, that you don't put the fertilizer in the crowns of the plants, because that, as it dissolves, can sort of burn or damage the growing points. It needs to be around the plants, as opposed to just over the top of the crowns. Very lightly for perennials that are planted in the fall. A lot of times, the end of the season, we're kind of digging, dividing, replanting stuff. Again, go with that really low, like maybe quarter or half a pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square foot rate, so that, again, you're fertilizing and for the roots and for the establishment over the fall and winter, so that the plant has the extra energy to go and be very productive in the spring. Again, around established plants, not over the top. If you are, like we just last fall in my yard, we put in 3 new perennial beds. And so at that time, we just did the fertilizer in the bed, not in individual holes. Even though we were planting different plants, it was fine to just amend the whole bed, just easier. And then in the hole or bed for new plants. I mean, if you're only doing one plant, put it in the hole. All right, trees and shrubs. These are your woodies. These are sort of your long-term keystone investment plants in your landscape. And there's two phases. There's the establishment and quick early growth, and then there's the mature maintenance period for these plants. So that's why you have to look at that range and figure out where on that range you fall. So newly planted plants, basically you want to be fertilizing them every year at that 3 to 4 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square foot rate, the high end of that range every year for the first 3 to 5 years. Get them established, get them up, get them going. If it's mature or already established, then you may not need to fertilize except once every 3 to 4 years, not every year. And you're going to go at the lower end because it's a maintenance type of a schedule that you're following. Your evergreens like hollies and junipers need less fertilizer. Things like red tips, roses, laurels, some of these other plants, they like more, okay? Things like your azaleas, rhododendrons, mountain laurels, camellias, think about where those types of plants grow. They're understory plants. And a lot of times they're in the western part of the state, right? The big groves of rhododendrons that are understory up in the mountains. In the mountains, your soils tend to be fairly thin. You don't have too many layers. They're not real deep soils. And so the roots of these plants tend to grow fairly close to the surface. So you can very easily damage these plants by over-fertilizing them. So in that regard, you might go with the lower rates, okay? And especially if your pH is more acidic, which these plants like, you don't, and a lot of your fertilizers are acid-based. You may not want to add a lot of fertilizer because it would make your pH go even lower. So again, think through the plants that you are trying to fertilize and what their requirements are. In early spring, again, when it needs the most nutrients, the quickest for fast growth, from your drip line outward on your canopies, and then if it's only one plant in the hole. So there are a lot of charts out there that show you the comparisons of the different types of fertilizers that are available. These are synthetic fertilizers, and they will always have higher percent nutrient concentrations in them. You can get like, the urea or the urea formaldehyde, the 46, 38, that's nitrogen, percent nitrogen in those products. So that's something to pay attention to. Also, different products have different speeds of reaction. And do you need something quickly, or are you going for that controlled release product for that season-long control? And again, are you using a product that is acidic and is going to contribute to the acidity of your soil? And if it's already acidic, maybe you need to look at a different product. And then if you're like me, I'm a plant person through and through, but math is not my strong point. So fertilizer calculations. You can't just go to the store and buy nitrogen. You have to buy a product that has nitrogen in it. And so you have to make that conversion of, if the soil test says I need 1 pound of nitrogen and I'm buying a product like the ammonium nitrate that has 33% nitrogen, how much of that product do I need to apply to get that 1 pound of nitrogen that has been recommended? And you have to do that conversion. I say, put the app on your phone. There's an app for everything, and that makes it really, really easy. All right. And in this case, this particular chart has already done the math for you. All right. With organic fertilizers, you will always have a lower percent of nutrients in them. So on this chart here, the highest percent is 13%. So very different than the rates that we saw on the previous chart. But there's trade-offs. Do you need more nutrients? A specialized formulation, you might go synthetic. If you don't need as high nutrient rate, maybe do organics, because organics have other benefits that synthetics do not. You'll be adding organic matter in a lot of cases. Maybe with a synthetic, it's a slower release. Maybe it's more economic, more readily available. more specialized to something like the bulbs and the bone meal, whatever it is. There are pros and cons to both types of fertilizers. But again, it goes back to the budget, the time and energy, and what your maintenance goals are. Don't forget that there are other sources of nutrients in the landscape, things like compost that you're adding. If it's not a product that has been analyzed and is consistently the same, which compost is, then it's still compost, but it can't be labeled as compost. It needs to be labeled as a soil conditioner, because it's variable. And so you have those types of products. Mulches, the organic mulches will break down and add nutrients. And then there's other things in the landscape like wildlife that also contribute nutrients, whether you want them to or not. So anyway, just remember that, and then your soils already have nutrients in them. So there are other sources out there. Where are you coming into the picture, and what do you need to add to what's already there, if anything? Just a reminder that over or improper fertilization can cause problems. It can change your pH and cause toxicities or deficiencies in nutrient levels. Too much can burn your roots and also damage the crown and new growth of the plant. You've heard of fertilizer burn, where you get the new leaves coming out in the spring and the margins of them are burned because of excess nutrients in the soil. Although this year we're going to see a lot of that burn because of all the road salts that were applied for all of our snow events this year. So be on the lookout for that, because I guarantee you will be getting plant samples in the office with a question, what's wrong with my plant? First question should be, is it adjacent to a driveway or a road? Because if you had the salts come off, you're going to have burn. And then, of course, the plants can only use so much of the nutrients at a time. And if they use what they need and there's excess there, then it can become an environmental pollutant. It can leach down into the soil and contaminate our groundwater aquifers, or it can run off and then cause problems in our waterways. Hence the total maximum daily load things for the Chesapeake Bay, right? From over-fertilization in our waterways. So be conscious of how much you're applying and how much the plant can actually use at one time, and don't contribute to the pollution issue. There are special situations in your landscape where nutrients should not be applied, because these parts of your landscape are there to manage nutrients in the landscape. So these things incorporate plants in a way that they're called phytoremediation. So phyto means plant and remediation means to fix. So using plants to clean up the environmental pollutants is what phytoremediation is, and that's what things like buffers do. So a buffer is the vegetation that's right there at the edge of your water, and it intercepts the runoff coming from upslope, slows it down, spreads it out, and the runoff that goes through that buffer, the plants suck up those nutrients. That's, a highly technical term there. And any runoff that does get through that buffer into the body of water is cleaner. So you're not adding nutrients to the water, which then causes algae blooms and all kinds of other things. So the buffers. So, if you're getting calls about managing algae in stormwater ponds, number one, educate the people about soil tests and appropriate application rates and timing for all the fertilizer going on in the spring on their lawns and gardens. And then second, talk to them about buffer zones to help prevent the nutrients from getting into the water. So with a buffer zone, you shouldn't need to be adding nutrients to fertilize these plants. Their job is to remove the nutrients in the runoff coming through them. And buffer zones take all shapes and sizes. They can be shrubs, it can be grasses, it can be ornamental plants, like the rhododendrons in the bottom picture. So it just depends what's in the buffer zone. But you shouldn't be needing to fertilize them. Things like rain gardens. This is probably the number one most common practice used in landscapes to manage stormwater. And then again, the runoff that has the nutrients in it goes into these rain gardens, and the plants and the soil and the microorganisms act as a biofilter to clean up that water before it either soaks in the ground, before the plants absorb it, and it evapotranspires back up into the atmosphere, or before it moves on somewhere else down the water pathway. Because rain gardens could be the beginning, the middle, or the end point for your water flow, your runoff pathway. But wherever the water is going, it's cleaner. And then that's what the plants are for. So you shouldn't need to fertilize plants in a rain garden. Wetlands, this is sort of like the last resort, the end of the line, where, again, runoff is coming off of the landscapes, and this acts as a great biofilter to help prevent the nutrients from getting into the bodies of water. And so I think the one at the top is somewhere down maybe Rudy Inlet, and the one at the bottom, that's somewhere Little Creek Tidal Marsh in Norfolk. So we do have a lot of wetlands around here. And you don't need to fertilize them. Green roofs, if you are designing something and incorporating a green roof, or if you've got a structure and you're retrofitting it with a green roof, the whole point of a green roof, again, is to intercept that precipitation, slow it down, spread it out, and then have the plants act as a biofilter. So again, you should not need to be adding nutrients to this type of a system in the landscape. And a lot of the systems now are modular. So the nurseries will grow the plants in these trays, and then you put the trays down like you would carpet tiles or something like that. And then, if something doesn't work, you take the tray out and put a new one in. So these systems are not as common as you might think, but they are in the landscapes occasionally. But again, you should not be fertilizing them. And then this is an example of something called conservation landscaping. So conservation landscaping is a way to landscape for the benefit of the environment. And so you put, right plant in the right place. You have dense canopy coverage. You have plants that grow well in that area, predominantly natives. You plant in a way like here that stabilizes this slope. And you reduce the needy plants. Basically, again, these areas are designed and installed in a way that you should not need to fertilize these areas because they're meant to enhance the environment. So, all right, so that's a lot to take in. And this is how you find me if you have questions after the fact. And then you have a copy of the presentation. If you decide that this is something that you want to talk about, do a speakers bureau talk or something like that, you are welcome to my presentation. You either have it here or you can, call me and I'll send it to you. But anything that I have, you don't have to start at ground zero if it's something that you want to use in any way, shape, or form. The only thing that I ask is that if there's a photo credit, keep it with the photo, okay? That's just good practice. So any questions? Oh, all the hands go up. Yes, please.
So, a person with trees and berries and stuff like that, all of those fertilizer rates, are those still applicable to the like peach trees, mascot trees, all that stuff? Like, is that a different bag?
Excellent question. So everything that I addressed in the presentation is more focused on ornamental plants. And your question is about growing like fruit trees and blueberries and shrubs and things like that that are edible plants. That was something that you would need to find the specific recommendations for. Not only the specific nutrients that they need, but the specific timing of it. And so there are several VCE pubs that have that information. And again, you need a soil test as well to know what you've already got. So definitely a good question. But if you're growing edible plants, look up the specifics of what those types of crops need. So, yes.
I have a bed that gets a lot of turf runoff.
Uh-huh.
And this year, either my forsythia or my eastern redbud flower. So I'm guessing I have a lot of nitrogen and anything else.
All right, so the question is that there's a bed that borders a turf area, and neither the forsythia nor the redbud bloomed this year. So is it a matter of the nitrogen coming off of the turf grass? So my first question is, what type of turf grass are you growing?
It's a common area,
Okay.
and I'm at the end.
All right, so you have no control over the turf, but the type of turf grass will determine when the nutrients are applied. So yes, so warm season versus cool season. Warm season, you're applying nutrients in May, June, and July. Cool season, it's October, November. And if it's fescue, yes, then you're applying nutrients in the fall to have the lush green lawn, and excess may have gotten over there into the beds. And I'm not saying it would prevent the blooms, but it would have an impact on them because the plant is gearing up to put green growth on. But I would also look, we've had some really funky weather. Okay, all the other ones are blooming but these. But sometimes if we have a cold snap after we've had some warm days, that can like abort the buds. But forsythia and red buds are generally bulletproof. So yeah, I suspect that it's...
What can I do? Is there something I can amend in my size to offset the other?
The question is, what can you do about it? I'm not sure, other than to maybe ask if they've done a soil test, if they're putting out the right amount, that should go out and not doing excess. Then maybe test the bed to see what's in the bed, and you can, if you have an opportunity to irrigate, you can maybe leach some of it through, possibly, or maybe add some organic matter that will build up a microbial population that will help break those nutrients down quicker. So, yeah, there's no good answer to that. I'm sorry. Anybody else? Okay. Yes, in the back. That's fine. Right, the question is, do I have a brand of fertilizer that I prefer? And as you know, Extension is not allowed to recommend specific brands because that would show bias, and we're supposed to be science-based, unbiased. I will say I have a high preference for control release products versus highly soluble quick release products. To me, honestly, if I'm doing something personally, I just go see which product has the formulation that I'm looking for. I'm not attached to a brand or a trade name. And in all honesty, a lot of times the brand and trade names, those products change every year. They tweak them, because sometimes it has this nutrient and less of that or more of this. Sometimes it's got the micronutrients added. So you just kind of have to see what fits best your situation. But I'm a huge fan of the control release products. So, anything else? Okay, so the comment here is all the leaves that fall, and everybody just rakes them up and throws them away. Yes, unfortunately. But yeah, you could very easily either rake them into a bed, or what I do is actually mow them and collect them in the bagger, so that chops them up, and then use them as a mulch. And it's not necessarily the look that I want, but it's free. And then what I'll do is I'll top dress with pine straw. So I get the chopped up leaves to get my nice thick layer, but then it, settles down and degrades quickly. But I put pine straw over the top to make it look pretty and to hold it in place so they don't blow. But yeah, it's a great resource. You chop them up with your lawnmower and put them in the compost pile, and they'll degrade quicker. It's the perspective that we have of what the landscape should look like, and it shouldn't have leaves in it, apparently. Being gardeners, we all understand the recycle process, and it's a key component. And it's not as, I wouldn't call it liquid gold like compost, but it is maybe it's silver. It's that valuable in the landscape. So use them if you got them, yeah, or steal them out of your neighbor's debris pile that they put out. The thing would be to be careful of is if you are taking them from somebody else's property, how are they maintaining their lawn? Because they may have put chemicals on the lawn for weed control or something like that. And if you rake the leaves, and a lot of times there's grass clippings in there too, sometimes those chemicals don't break down. And if you've got a broadleaf weed killer that you've put on your grass, they've mowed the grass, put the clippings in the bag, and you pick them up and then put the clippings and leaves and stuff around your plants are broadleaf. And if there's a residue, you could potentially harm your plants. So be careful where you get your leaves from. Any other questions? It's always my pleasure to be here. You know where to find me. Thank you. If you're on the other side of the water, come visit us. Again, we have 29 demonstration gardens. We'll actually have 31 by the end of the spring. And don't forget about y'all's plant sale. 'Tis the season, right? So, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fox. I always know when you're going to come here for a presentation, it's a can't miss because you do such an excellent job. Thank you so much.